Welcome to Rick Rack Ruby. I'm Laura Cluvo. Today we will be making this mini stocking ornament from the Pixie Noel 2 fabric collection. So I'm calling this a bonus project. It's really similar to the last stocking, but I just sized it down so that we could effectively feature this little deer. And it's fun and easy. So let's get started. To make the mini reindeer stocking, we'll start with the pattern. The mini stocking is 2.5 inches wide here and about 5 inches tall. I have a little hair more than 5 inches here, but basically 2.5 by 5. From the pattern, I have cut one foundation from a Pelon 40 non-fusible interfacing, and then 2 lining pieces and 1 backing. Here's the backing. The backing faces in the opposite direction that I want the stocking front to face. And here are my lining pieces. I'll set those aside. To begin, I've fussy cut this little reindeer from this fabric. It's sort of like a border print with the swag and the bunnies, and there are different reindeer. I like the one with the red bow and then has the little musical notes behind him. There's also one with a blue bow and the mushrooms that's really cute. I've done that one too. But for this example, we're going to use this red bow. The section here is 2.5 inches wide and 2 inches tall. I centered the reindeer the best that I could. I don't think it's perfect, but approximately in the middle. And then I pulled the square down to the corner of the stocking. So I'll start off with that piece there. And then next I'm going to add the cuff. I have some scraps and then I ran out of some scraps, so I had to cut some little pieces. So I like to, I don't want like this bouquet to be right dead center. I like to just kind of let it hit randomly. So I'll line this up along the top edge of my fussy cut square there. Pin it and stitch across right here with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. There we go. Then I'll fold this up and I'll press it, and then I'll cut this out around the top of the stocking shape. For this patch below the reindeer, I'm going to use a stripe. Just line that up. I like for the stripes to go in this direction. They're already printed on the bias or on the diagonal. So I'll stitch across here, press it, and trim it. There we go. I trimmed this piece, just kind of rough cut it to the shape of the stocking. And now I'm going to cut a little wedge with the point of the wedge here, and then the bigger part of the wedge over here. This is a disappearing marker. This is 1/4 inch from here to here, and this is 1 1/4 inches. I'm going to cut right on that line. That looks good. Then my next piece will be this blue kind of floral, and I'm going to set it like this and stitch across, fold it back, and trim it, and I'll be right back. Then once again, I'll mark a 1/4 inch over here, and is that right? Yeah. 1/4 inch here and 1 1/4 inch here, which means 1 1/4 inch from the seam. So 1/4 inch here from the seam and 1 1/4 inch here from the previous seam. And again, this is my disappearing marker, and I'll cut that. These don't have to be perfect. Even though I say, you know, 1/4 inch and 1 1/4 inch, it doesn't really have to be perfect. Now I'll use this pink floral going to line that up and stitch along here. I'll be right back. Now in this case, I'm going to do the opposite, and this side will be 1/4 of an inch, and then this side will be 1 1/4 inches. So it's like that. So these wedges are this wedge is in the opposite direction. And I think you can see that my final patch will be blue, and it'll be here right on the end. So I'll line that up, stitch across, fold it, press it, and trim it. And now from the back, I'm going to stitch around the perimeter of the entire shape with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now I'll thread my machine with red thread, and we'll do some decorative stitches along these seams. To keep things simple, I'm going to use only 3 different stitches: a triple zigzag, a blanket stitch, and a feather stitch. So it'll be zigzag, blanket stitch, feather stitch, zigzag, blanket stitch. Here's how my decorative stitches look. I don't think I really have anything to add or describe for you, except that I decided to put the zigzag above the patch because the ear was a little close to the seam. So I just put it up in the cuff. Besides that, it's pretty straightforward, not hard to do at all. Now let's finish up the stocking. Okay, so I have 2 lining pieces. I'm gonna put these right sides together and then pin across the top. Here's my lining. Here's my backing. And I will line that one up also and pin across the top. Now I'll stitch across the top, the straight edge, with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And now I'll open these up and match the lining to the lining and the front to the back. And then working from here, this sort of straight edge, matching up the seams, folding the seam allowance down, and I'll pin through that seam allowance all the way through. That looks good. And then the same thing on the other side over here. Making sure the seams are matching and the seam allowances are folded down toward the front of the stocking, not toward the lining. And then I'll just continue pinning all the way around and leaving an opening here in the bottom of the lining. Here's how it looks. It's sewn together all the way around with this little opening here. This opening is about 2 inches, maybe 1.5 inches. I'm going to trim the seam allowance and I'm going to clip into these inner corners, and then I'll turn it right side out. And when I say clip, I mean I clip first before I trim the seam allowance. I just do multiple clips into there. You can also cut it out with pinking shears. And then I'll just trim away the seam allowance, not too much, but about half of it. And then I'll turn. Here we are all trimmed, and I usually trim over the garbage can so that those little bits fall into the garbage and don't wind up on my work surface. And now I'm reaching in all the way to the tip of the toe, and then I'm going to turn it all the way through to the opening, pull it through, and then I'll get a chopstick and I'll just kind of poke everything out and make sure I get it all the way out. I want to be sure I have a nice round toe and a nice round heel, and there's no like little bump outs or places where I sewed too close and the seam isn't holding. I just kind of look at everything, kind of do an inspection. Now I'm going to sew up this opening. I just fold the seam allowance in, and I'm just going to top stitch this. It won't be pretty, but it's going to be secure. And now I'll tuck the lining in, making sure that lining, the toe lining goes all the way to the tip of the stocking. All the way into there. I'm just making sure I get it all the way in, and that looks good. I'm going to go over to the iron and press it. I added a hanging loop with red baker's twine and a bow. Guess I didn't have the camera on for that. And I also wanted to show you a little variation with the white fabric. This fabric comes in pink, white, and mint green. And it was really fun to work with the little deer. Thank you for watching my video. If you're enjoying my tutorials, please like, share, and subscribe.